In today's video, we are going to be covering how to build secure and compliant applications with FlutterFlow. I know this is a very underrated topic regarding security when you're building applications, but one thing you have to understand is for your application to be successful and exist for a very long time, you need to be secure and be able to comply with a lot of policies. So in this video, we're going to be covering why this is important and how you can use FlutterFlow as a platform to achieve the maximum security that you need for your application and be compliant with security policies. So stick around, and if you haven't already, please check out the channel and be sure to leave a subscribe, leave a comment, or share your ideas and help support the channel. Well, without further ado, let's get straight into the video. Now, when we talk about security and compliance when building an application, this is something that is very underrated, as I mentioned earlier before, because at times you just build so that you want to be able to have an MVP or you want to test the market or just have your solution out there, but you forgot this critical aspect of your applications. So why is this important in the first place? Let's take, for example, if your users know that your application is secure, that data or whatever thing they're inputting your application is secure, that's already leverage for you. One of the reasons why you need your application to be secure and compliant is just so that you can increase your users' trust and loyalty. And also, compliance aspect require you to follow legal procedures, and so you have to meet up with policies that have been defined in a particular area. Take, for example, if you are building around Europe, there's GDPR and there's like other security policies relating to the kind of applications they are building. Like if you're building for the hospital or credit card or you're processing that kind of data, you need to be compliant with those with the policies that are in those domains. As we already know, security is a key factor in our digital world. So you need to make sure that your app is secure enough to not be vulnerable. That could lead to data breaches, and so people's data will be compromised. You hear hacking every day or data breaches every day. You don't want to be a victim of that. And if your application is secure, that already gives you a competitive advantage. If you're building the same application with somebody and yours is more secure and it can be proven and your users know about that, that's already an advantage for you. Real quick, I'm going to be walking you through over 15 points on how you can achieve maximum security and compliance when building with FlutterFlow. I'll show you, talk about it, discuss a point. I'll show you how you can implement it with FlutterFlow. So stick around, you don't want to miss. In the first place, you need to enable secure API calls through cloud functions. FlutterFlow has the capability for you to route API calls through cloud functions, and that way it's much more secure as compared to you doing it manually, like just revealing everything on the client side. Take, for example, if you're building a web application with FlutterFlow, each API call that is being made can be written in the developer's console. So if you have any secrets lurking around there, people can easily see it. This is a good place for you to distinguish between securing API actions as compared to possible vulnerable actions that can occur on your front end. Now, when you process this sensitive information into the cloud, it's much more secure and reduces the ability for any security threats. So I'm going to demonstrate that and just show you real quick like how you can enable secure API calls. This is a FlutterFlow application, right? This is just an example here. So if you come over to this API manager that we have on the side here, on this API manager, let's take for example this jokes API group. You can secure this entire API group by simply coming here on advanced group settings and then make private. Here they note they say making an API call private is useful if it uses tokens or secrets that you do not want to expose in the front end application. So you routing, just simply enabling this box. Let me close this. You simply enabling this checkbox that is here. If you enable it like that, boom, you're already saying you want to make the entire API group secure. And when you save that, you'll be required to deploy this API to Google Cloud, and that's going to have a cloud function that triggers each time they are calling any API in this group. So this is a very useful thing that you need to make sure that you have in your applications. Any sensitive endpoint that you are hitting, make sure that you route it through Google Cloud. Now, if you are not using, say, Firebase, for example, to have Google Cloud enabled, you can potentially create a project just to be able to use the Firebase cloud function, right? Or otherwise, we are going to be looking somewhere down the line how you can achieve that with Supabase and other methods too. So that's the first point. Now the next one is still around enabling authenticated API calls where necessary. We are still talking about API calls again, because this is like in these modern days we build applications that communicate with other platforms, and that communication has been happening through API calls. So you want to make sure that if an API call is supposed to be called by an authenticated user, it can only be called by that authenticated user. You can normally set your conditional that checks if a user is authenticated before you call an API call, but there's a way FlutterFlow allows you to do it easily. And let me show you real quick again. So here again, still on this our API manager, you can still come down here and you see requires authentication. This is an endpoint. Let's take for example this get 10 jokes. We come here on advanced settings. We can specify this particular endpoints, like this particular endpoints will require authentication. Therefore, these endpoints will not be called by a user that is not authenticated into our application, right? So if a user is not logged in, they are not going to be able to call this endpoint. Now this endpoint is private, therefore it routes itself through cloud functions. And now it's also, we are requiring authentication to make sure that a user must be authenticated before they call this endpoint. But something like get random joke, I just want them to get a single random joke. We can leave that open because we don't care, like, okay, we just want to advance, like just give a single random joke. This is just an example. So I want to give a single random joke, so can keep this open. A user must not be authenticated before they call this endpoint. So you need to be able to identify the kind of endpoints that your application is using to know what security policies or what security restrictions you are placing around that. And I think if you can have those things working for you, you are going to have a very amazing and secure application. The third point is form fields validation. It is very, very critical. I mean, we have applications that user needs to input things and we need to receive that data, either process it or call an action to the database or do something or just save the data. You need to make sure that you are validating any input that you have in your application, right? This prevents users to input like the kind of data that I don't want. Take for example, if I want to receive a name, I don't want you to input an email. If I want to receive an email, I don't want you to input a name or something like that. So you need to make sure that you are validating the data that you are taking in. Now, FlutterFlow, for example, has built-in validation features, right? You can validate to receive an email. You can validate to receive, say, a website URL, or you can validate to receive what kind of data that you want to receive in your input field. And you can also extend that functionality using regex expression. So you can have an expression that says, okay, I need just capital letters, and then you implement that, and that is the kind of data that you want to receive. And the one key things when building is make sure that you are handling the errors accurately. Take for example, if a field requires you to enter your first name and last name, and the user enter just the first name, you should tell them that this field requires a first name and last name. They should not just like, it's not automatic for them to know like, okay, maybe this field is required or whatever. Be specific on the kind of errors that you are displaying to the users. Now, along the line, I'm going to mention why displaying this kind of errors is very, very important too. So let me show you how you can do this form field validation with FlutterFlow. So I have this example page here. As you can see, we have these input fields like for the full name, email, phone number, and whatnot. So let's take, for example, I want to do validation on this field. I can come here like on the right on its own on the properties panel. If I want it to be a password field, then I'll just have to check this password so that like when I'm inputting the values, then it's not visible, be like the dotted lines. Now we come here, there are a lot of things that we can modify. Now the keyboard type, I'm going to make it strict, like, okay, if it's supposed to be a number field, let me take for example this phone number. If it's supposed to be a number field, then I can make it only bring out like the key part that is coming up should be like just phone, as you can see here. So there are various ways for me to specify like how I want to receive this input. I can do URL to make sure that I receive URL, street address, or whatever. These are the various things I can do here. Now, just specifying this keyboard type is not good enough for the kind of validation that I want to implement in your application. There are so many things and so many ways I can extend it. FlutterFlow has all of that. For phone numbers, I can specify like, okay, let me just get like only digits or whatever thing, alphanumerical values. Now, I also mentioned about using regular expressions. Let's take, for example, you want to add additional formatting on any of your input fields. You can also specify by using custom regex, right? So you can specify the regular expression. If you don't know what that is, you can just prompt ChatGPT and you get an expression depending on whatever thing you need it for. And then you specify the expression here. Now, this is going to make sure that whatsoever value the user inputs in that field match the criteria of what you want to collect. Generally, well, after doing this and say you want to submit the button, or sorry, you want to submit the data or whatsoever, you need to a way of validating to make sure that this value, all of this input is correct. Let's touch on this bio. You may need to use a maximum of 50 characters or whatever thing. You can set that, all of those things here, like the maximum length. You can specify the number of characters that you want to use, like you enforce it, and all of that maximum length. So you can specify all of these restrictions on the kind of data that you collect from your users. And now to actually submit all of this, let me come like this top column that has all of these input fields. I can wrap this, as you can see my screen here. I'm going to wrap this in a form, right? In a form validation. Then on this form itself again, I can add another restriction or another validation on each of these fields that I have here, on each of these input fields. So take for example the first text field, which I think is the name, like the full name that we have here. I can say yes, I check this box and I say I want to validate this field, and then do like minimum requirement, maximum requirements, and then probably like toggle this automatic validate, just so that if this is required, like if this is required to match a particular validation criteria that I've set, and the user wants to submit and it has not matched, it is going to be automatically validated. So, or as the user is typing, it's automatically going to be prompting for that validation. So this is how you can filter data that you receive from users using your input fields. And I think if you can work around that, that is going to be very, very helpful when you're building a secure application. The next thing we have here is secure Firebase with proper security rules. Now, Firebase is one of the primary database that has been supported by FlutterFlow, and a lot of users tend to use that. It is very important that when you're using Firebase, you make sure that the data that you're storing has adequate rules, right? So you don't want somebody to be able to read somebody's data. You don't want somebody to be able to modify somebody's data. You need to restrict like those kind of permissions. When you are doing all of that, it's going to make sure that the data that you're storing about your user is safe, right? And there's a way you can do all of that. So let's get over to Firebase. I think this is very, very common. Firebase has a very detailed documentation on how you can implement what are they calling it, security validation. So if we head over here to this our application and come over to this tab, after connecting our Firebase, we can come here, like on this settings, Firestore settings, we can see Firestore security rules. So far for me, I have just this single item that I created, this single collection core items that I created. So in my use case, I may want like everybody to be able to create, or maybe I want just authenticated users to be able to create records, right? So this is going to, FlutterFlow has this interface that is very, very easy for you to configure your security rules. And as you are configuring them, you see the code here. If you are able to, you can head over to the Firebase platform and modify the security rules there. So here I'm saying that I want what are you saying, only authenticated users to be able to create. I want everybody to be able to read. Maybe I want just like tagged users. If you come here like tagged users, you are going to tie access to modify or perform that action on that field to a particular user identifier. Maybe you can use like user reference or whatsoever. Now I'm going to probably like make a detailed video about Firebase security rules, but that's just the idea, right? And also who should be able to delete a particular record. Here is currently set to no one. These are the kind of things I need to be looking around, and when you're done with that, you deploy your security rules. For a detailed view, if you come over here to Firestore and you come here under this rules tab, right, then you'll be able to see like the various rules that you have for your database collections, and you can actually test these rules here and monitor and see how they actually interact with your application. So this is like a rules. I can edit these rules here manually, and actually the changes will be synced to back to FlutterFlow, or you can modify them back here on FlutterFlow and have them populate back on Firebase. So I urge you to actually take a look at that and consider crafting your security rules so that there is optimum management of data access that is going to help your application to be much more secure. Now Firebase also has this thing like develop and test. We mentioned about monitoring this thing, so you can actually test the rules, try to query your Firebase collections as a particular user to see if you actually have access to. The same as you can also like log in and log out to use the different user and see what kind of data you can access back here on FlutterFlow. So that's a typical point that I want to look at when you are working with Firebase. Now the next thing we have on the list is for you to make sure you enable row level security when using Supabase. Now Supabase is the second type of database that is supported by FlutterFlow, and what you want to make sure that you have is you enforce row-based access. Take for example, a typical example is maybe you have users like a multi-purpose application that have users, admin, or you want to mention guest or managers or whatever thing. So that role on its own should be managed with the various access and the permissions that person is needed to perform a particular action on your application, or either read or write to your database. Now this is very, very important, like something like Firebase, because you can manage scalability easily. If at some point you want to upgrade somebody's role from a user to say a manager, all you just need to do is update that person's role, and whatsoever restrictions or permission that you have set for that particular user is still going to be applied. Now regarding to FlutterFlow, here you can configure your Firebase here in this section, as we already know down here in the setting sections and integrations. You can configure your Firebase there. But now setting Supabase, so this is your Supabase, you can actually do all of this. But now setting the roles and permissions or whatever thing that access can be managed on your Firebase dashboard. So if you come over here to authentication, and then you'll be able to see the policies, so you can configure policies and give access to data based on what kind of criteria that user matches. And also on your tables, you can modify the access that you have on your tables using row level securities. So I can say I want to be able to access this data if only the user is authenticated, just like how we did for Firebase. I want to be able to access this user if only this user, I want to be able to access this data if only this user is of this particular type. So you can configure all those policies and assign them to particular access or permissions that you want to perform the actions I want on your database. That is a very important thing to look out for. And that role-based access is called RBAC, and it gives your user granular permissions to access your data, and that is a very, very useful thing that you need to consider when you're developing with something like Supabase. Now on to the next point we have is always try to use up-to-date and compatible packages from pub.dev. Now pub.dev is where Flutter manages both their native and community packages. So here the points I want to highlight is you always need to make sure that the packages that you're using are up to date and they are the latest version. And also check for security vulnerabilities on all outdated packages. Like if you have a package that you have been using in your project for a while, just make sure that you always check if it has been updated. Another thing to highlight here is you need to ensure that the package that you want to use in your application is compatible with both the Flutter version and the FlutterFlow version. Now FlutterFlow on its own comes with like some required packages, and you can see them down here in the settings sections. So if you head over to your project and then you go to settings, and right here you are going to see project dependencies, right? And all of this is going to be the list of current packages or the dependencies that this application is currently using. So we have say data table 2, this is the version that is currently using, and a lot of these other packages. And you can also add your own package. Before adding a package, let's say you are going to add something like path provider, for example, you can come here on pub.dev and you see this path provider is currently you see the version 2.14, and then it is supported for both Android, iOS, Linux, macOS, and Windows. So you need to make sure for this package is compatible for your use case. This package, for example, path provider, is not supported for web, so the functionalities that it comes with may not function accurately for web platforms. Right here you can see published 2 months ago. You can also go to the GitHub repository to check like the activity that is happening on that package to see if it is outdated or it's up to date. Here is that 3 compatible, and then the versions, you can see the various versions that this path provider package has migrated right up to 2.14. So these are key things I need to look at when you are trying to import a package and use in your applications. And taking note of all of these things is going to help secure your application and keep them up to date. So you can see the activity, this path provider, for example, you can see the activity on this repository. It was like 2 months ago they upgraded something, but this thing has been living for long. So this is the kind of things I can gauge to know if a package is up to date and reliable to use. Now the next point we have on the list is specify acceptable file type on uploads. Now user uploads is one of the key functionalities that you always find yourself using in your application. Like you may need users to upload a file, either a PDF, an image, a zip file, or whatsoever file format. Now it is very, very important that you specify the file type that you want a user to upload. Take for example, if a user is about to upload an image like a profile picture, well, there's no need for you to give them ability to upload right up to about say 5 megabyte image. So you can restrict those kind of things to prevent them from uploading malicious file types. So here we say restrict acceptable file types during uploads. So if I need you to upload an image here, there's no need for me to make that upload to be of any file type. So I should specify like, okay, I want either a PNG, JPEG, or whatsoever thing. Now, ensure file type validation to block harmful files. Besides just ensuring that upload type is, besides just giving ability for them to upload just an image, I need to ensure that is a file type that I want, because files can be modified before it reaches your server. So this is another check that has to be done. Now, limit file size to prevent attacks. I just mentioned about you not giving ability for users to upload like very huge file in sessions for like profile pictures, because that's going to provide a latency when you are trying to pull out that image to display to users, and then it's going to overcrowd your server. Now the way FlutterFlow handles that is, if you come here, like you try to add an action to upload an image, I'm just going to add an example action. Let's take this action on this page, and I'm going to just tie an action here that allows for us to upload a file. So let me open this action editor, and right here I'm going to do on tab. What do I want to do? Let's search for the action to upload, and you're going to see the various properties that you can play with to manage the kind of files that you upload. So upload, and I'm going to say now I'm expected to get a media, right? I need an image and not just any kind of file. So I've selected this upload type. I can do like select local upload or Supabase, but this is where the thing comes in. Allow photo. So I need them to just upload a single photo. Then I can do like image quality, and I can also set restriction on the file type. So do I want them to upload multiple images? I can check this box if I want them to upload multiple images or not. So right here in this field, I can specify the maximum width that that I want to give the users to be able to upload a file. Like, okay, I don't want a photo of more than like 1080p or something, like for the width, and then something of the height. I can define that too. Then here I can also include dimensions. Now if I check this box, it's going to include the dimension of that image or the file that I select, and then I can then use that to perform like further computation, to do further checks to verify if that image actually meets the criteria of what I want the users to upload. Now there's also an action to upload file. So there's also an action to upload file. If we do upload again, as you can check that it allows for other file types to be selected. So here we did upload or save media. Now I want to do upload or save file. Here we can specify the kind of files, like what file type do you want to receive, PDF, audio, or any. So here this has specific, this is what FlutterFlow has hard coded. But if you need to have granular access or do something specific, you can use like custom packages and then implement all those checks. But just make sure that everything is intact, and they are checking everything to make sure that the user uploads what is required. Now the next thing we have is point 8 is use conditional builders, logic, and checks where needed. This is very, very critical. Let's take, for example, you're building an application where there are two types of users. There is, say, the buyer and the seller. You don't want the seller to be able to interact with your application as the buyer. So you need to only present seller data to a seller and then buyer data to a buyer, or buyer user interface to a buyer and a seller user interface to a seller. Now FlutterFlow has a way for you to handle this easily using conditional builders. Now when you come about logic checks, if you say you want to make an action to say write to the database or update something, it is very critical that you check to make sure, like, okay, this query that I want to execute or this set of actions I want to execute, does it meet a particular criteria? Like, okay, is this person a user that is trying to insert into this database? If they are a user, then go along and do. Otherwise, if they have of a different access role or a user type, then you restrict that permission or that action from happening. Now implement conditional builders for dynamic content. Now this was just explained, like the user interface can be different depending on the kind of user that is using the application. So that is possible using conditional builders. Now apply conditional logic for user interactions. If you have a dashboard, you don't expect somebody that is not an admin to access that dashboard. That is where you do like all those checks. It's not just about conditional visibility. Now validate decisions and actions before committing to the database. I already highlighted that. Manage application state effectively. So if you need to do recurrent like checks, you can probably pull like the user data. Like if somebody just logs in, I upload a global app state to say this person at this instance using my application is a user. That way I don't have to probably be reading my database multiple times to get that query, but I know that that page state that I've already saved is there, that I can always do those checks. And it is good to always update them with time. Don't keep it persistent, but just update it with time, just so that the user data keeps synced. Example, show and hide content based on user roles. This is what I've already highlighted. Now let me show you the various ways that FlutterFlow supports you to do that kind of thing. Let's take, for example, we don't want somebody to be able to see this particular personal information. We don't want, say, if somebody is a guest, for example, they should not be able to see this thing. So what I can do is I can wrap this entire session, right? I'll wrap this section. I'll say wrap widget, and I'm going to wrap. There's a widget called conditional builder. Now this widget allows you to set a condition for a particular widget to be visible or not, or a condition for a particular widget. If the condition is true, this widget is going to take effect. If the condition is false, then the other widget that I have set the alternative is going to take effect. So I'm going to wrap this widget in a conditional builder like this, and then now we have the conditional builder here that we can set the condition. So what I want to do is we should display personal information if and only if the user is logged in. Yeah, we can just do something like this simple. If we can set conditions like if something is something, single condition or combined conditions, right? But what I just want is something very simple. Let me say global properties is user logged in. So I want this to be visible if the user is logged in, right? Then that's going to be the widget that is going to show in that position. Otherwise, we have the else condition. Else, I can specify another widget to show. So I can, let me check here to enable this thing to be visible. Then what do I want to show if the else is? I'm going to add another section here that says just a simple container. I see the container, then I can add a text like say please log in, just something like that, very simple. And that way I've restricted a a user to not be able to set like email or phone number or whatever thing if they are not logged in. That same thing applies if you want to do conditional builder for other properties or other related data that you want to use in your application. So you can still implement this similar scenario to make sure that users only see what they are supposed to see. That is for conditional builder. Now there's also conditional visibility. Let's take for example, if I want to something to be visible just to a particular person, like this additional details or whatsoever, I can hide this section exactly by coming here, visibility. I can enable this conditional visibility and then set the condition for which I want this to be visible. Right, if I want this to be visible, say let me take for example, if the email belongs to a particular, like if the email is fixed to something, I can do single condition, right? Then I'm going to do the authenticated user email, say authenticated user email. If the email is exactly equal to gmail@mail.com, then for that thing will be visible. So any user that logs in or any user that authenticates and it's not gmail@mail.com, doesn't have this email, it's not going to see this particular page because I've made it hidden using conditional visibility. Now there's a difference between conditional builder and conditional visibility. Conditional visibility, we just use it to hide widget on your page, whereas conditional builders, you can actually use it to determine what widget should show, or as Flutter, as it works with Flutter, which widget should be painted on the user screen. That's that for that. Now let's take for example, if I want to tie an action or a conditional action to actually do a check here, FlutterFlow also has that I can do. I say add conditional, right? This is an action. Then I can specify whatsoever condition that I want to do before this action is executed. So maybe I want to check like if this user has paid for subscription, or if this user has done something or whatsoever, just to make sure that that action that is taken is legitimate, right? It's supposed to be taken by that user. So that's another thing to consider. Now on to the next point that we have on the screen is prompt users before launching external URLs. Right, somehow in your application you may need to point users to an external location. It is good by this prompting, I mean like don't just like launch the URL, because FlutterFlow has that action that launch the URL. Don't just launch the URL and let the user go to that page. If it's an external URL, actually show them, tell them that this is where they are navigating to. Now this is going to help them build integrity in your application. Now, to do that FlutterFlow, you can use something like dialogues, right? FlutterFlow has a feature called dialogue. You can do like pop-up dialogues and just ask them to confirm like you're about to navigate to this URL. Spell the URL out correctly so that they see it, like you're about to go to this URL. If it's an external URL, then they have to confirm like, okay, take me there or something before you go there. Now, this can help mitigate phishing. Yeah, this is very important, because if the user sees the URL like, okay, this looks fishy, say somehow if that URL is being stored in your database and an attacker somehow manages to update that URL and put a vulnerable one, then the users are going to be able to look at that URL and say, okay, no, this is not correct, or this doesn't look very good, and then that can help them just escape that phishing scam. Now, ensuring users confirm external links enhances their browsing experience and reinforces trust in your application's integrity. So you need to keep that intact. Now, the way FlutterFlow handles that, again, we are still going to use a typical action. So if a user is trying to navigate to somewhere, I can just simply do something like a dialogue. This dialogue, so I'm going to do confirm dialogue to make sure like, okay, let them confirm the action that they're about to take, and I'll just say something like go to external site, right? And if they say confirm or something, then it takes them to that site. So that thing is just going to prompt and say go to external site. Then here on this value, I can probably like print the URL that they are navigating to. Then here I set a conditional action that if this alert dialog has been confirmed, before I set the action that launches that URL to that external website. So now if you come here, now search for the launch URL, then we are also going to have this action that can launch them now to the actual URL that we want them to go to. So this, like this, doing something like this, going to give your users visibility of the things that are happening, and then it's going to build integrity and trust. Now the next point that we have here is you should need to have a defined terms and service and privacy policy. Now this is a point that I cannot emphasize on very much, because it is very important. I think having a terms of service and privacy policy is a requirement for both Google Play and Apple submission. Like if you want to submit your application, you need to have a terms of service. But the way this plays a role is because if you are processing users data, you need to specify how you are making use of that data, like how you are storing that data. Users need to know that data is in safe hands. Again, we are still talking about security. A clear and accessible terms of service, ensuring legal compliance. So if you have a clear terms of service and you have users in a particular location that they are required to meet a particular standard before your application runs, then that's going to already help you to escape that kind of legal complications. Ensure that users agree before using related features in the application. If you require users to sign up or to accept your terms of service before they sign up, then prompt them to accept it before they sign up into your application. If there is a particular feature that maybe collects sensitive data, let them be aware like that is what actually happens, and let them accept that terms of service before they proceed with that action. Now, regularly update your legal documents as law evolve. Governance and policies, they update them with time. Like since government change, they can update those rules, like okay, at this point, maybe if your application needs to work in this particular location, you need to meet this kind of criteria, or this is how you should handle user data, this is how you should present these things to user. So you need to also update your legal documents, the terms of service and whatnot, to also match those the evolution, like all this evolution that is happening. A key thing here is users should be informed regarding the data usage. This promotes transparency and trust within the application. So if I'm creating my application, if I'm creating an account on your app and I'm inputting my credit card information, I need to know like how are you keeping that data, how are you storing that data, how are you using the data, are you selling it to advertisers? All of that information builds transparency. Now there are a lot of tools out there that you can use to generate privacy policies. This is like an example. You can generate a privacy policy for free. If you don't know how to actually write one, you can prompt ChatGPT, have a conversation with it on the kind of application that you're using, the kind of data that you're collecting, and it's going to generate a privacy policy and even terms of service for your app. And when you have that, make it accessible publicly in your application. Take for example, on this page, I can specify like this page requires authentication or not. If you want to embed your privacy policy on your application, let it not require authentication, let it be publicly accessible. So here, for example, on FlutterFlow, you can see requires authentication at the top right here where my mouse is. So make sure that the page that has your terms and service and privacy policy should not have authentication. Now, a typical place to allow users to accept this thing, terms and service, is on your login page. So if you come here on one of these sample pages, we can just add like, by creating an account, you accept our terms of service and privacy policy. So that's a key thing that you need to have for to make sure that your application is compliant with security policies. Now, the 11th point, you want to make sure that you handle all your security keys and secrets with care. Now, this is not something to even like to shout about. You don't want to expose, take for example, your OpenAI API keys. You don't want to expose that to the public. Just the same, like if you are integrating, say for example, Twilio or maybe Stripe, you don't want to expose those security keys to the public. You need to keep them private and then limit access to the people that have access to this to those keys. If you are working with a team and somebody is not concerned with that aspect of implementation, they're not supposed to know about that. That's how you can limit exposure and make sure that your application is stays secure. You don't want to at one point have your security keys, let's take for example your Stripe API keys, to be leaked or just be available in the public. Someone can use that and probably take actions on your behalf that are not authorized. So this is a key example to note that. However, I want to make this thing secure, that is up to you, but just know you need to keep your security keys and all secrets, handle them with care. Now the next point we have here is the 12th, data encryption when handling sensitive information. So take for example, in one way you may want to build your application and also add like some additional functionalities or some implementations that's just more complex and involves the use of private or identifiable information, right? So you need to implement custom ways of handling that sensitive information. Now, an example here is you can use like packages from pub.dev to do encryption, to build your own custom encryption algorithm. And when you are doing that, ensure that the encryption keys that you're using are secretly managed. If, take for example, you want to store, like you are managing users' access to, say, their Google Drive, for example, you want to be able to store that access token securely. Because you're authenticating on behalf of those users, you need to store the access token securely in a way that it cannot be exploited. Now, on to the next point, conducting regular security audits. Now, just launching your application and keeping it out there in the wild is not enough. You need to make sure that you are monitoring security audits. You are monitoring users' activity. Something like Supabase even alerts you if he notices anything wrong with the way users use your application. You can set alerts to on Firebase or just monitor, like have Firebase analytics on, that you monitor and see the things that are happening in your application. Look at all the actions that are happening. I'm going to show you in a little bit how you can tie analytics into your application, like Firebase. Conducting frequent security audits identifies vulnerabilities and enable prompt rectification. So if, take for example, at one point notice like the amount of writes to your Firestore database is very huge, like there's a spike, then you can say, okay, maybe you are not handling some rows effectively because your application has been running normally, then you don't see any surge in the number of users, but then there's a spike in the activities like the reads and writes. That's a good place for you to go and check your security rules and make sure that you are actually having them closed down and only necessary for the needed actions. Regularly assess your app for security risks. Now this is very, very important. Besides just giving the users, you too can also try using it, like try to break your application. You're going to see a lot of things. Use automated tools and manual code reviews. You can actually export this FlutterFlow. Since FlutterFlow allows you to export your code, you can actually export your code and then try to do manual testing, right? So you can bring the code down. Sorry, automated testing. It's a security audit that you can also do. The automated tools, I don't have a name offhand here. The automated tools I can try out to automate code review. They can actually look at the code that FlutterFlow has generated for you and then review it and probably point out some security vulnerabilities. There's one time I implemented a custom package, I think a rich text editor, then it was pointing to an outdated resource on the internet. I did automated testing on the application and I was able to identify and trace down that particular URL, and I was able to rectify that package. So that's a very, very cool thing to do, and it's very, very important. You need to address vulnerabilities immediately as you discover them. This is something like you don't even need to sleep on it. If you notice like there's something wrong with your application security wise, then you need to attack it head on. So here on FlutterFlow, for example, Firebase, on your Firebase console, you can have like a whole analytics that shows the actions that's happening, like all the triggers and whatnot, everything. So here on Firebase, all you have to do is you come here on your settings sections, right, and you scroll down to the bottom and you're going to see analytics. So you can actually tie custom analytics like Google Analytics into your application. That is going to keep track of like all the actions and the events that are happening in your application, right? If you do that, then you've already conquered one scenario of monitoring and tracking down vulnerabilities. And also over here on Firebase, like on this Firebase section, you can also enable Crashlytics. So you can see here, you can enable this Crashlytics. Like if your application happens to crash for some reason, then it's going to be visible on your Firebase. Like you can actually trace that down. Then performance monitoring is good to just have all of these checks enabled, right? So you stay on top of everything that is happening in your application and you can see it in daylight. Now if you have a need of probably implementing something custom to also like receive more data on how your application is being used, then by all means feel free to do that. But it's very important that you stay on top of every vulnerability that you discover so that you attack and you handle them effectively. Now the next action point is educate your users on best security practices. Besides your users just being users, they also need more than the value that your application provides to them, right? Because if at one point something happens wrong, if something goes wrong while they are using your application, then you've lost that user. So if, take for example, a user is required to, a very typical example is prompt your users to set strong passwords, right? You can set password restriction or input restriction on the kind of password that you want to receive from the user. We're speaking about form field validations, and I mentioned that you can use regex. If, take for example, you need a user password to have like a number, a capital letter, a special character, or whatever, you can use regular expressions to specify the kind of password that the user must input. So that's something to have in mind. Educate your users about creating strong passwords. And now, alerts that you show on field should not just be like password is incorrect. Actually tell them like to generate a strong password, you need this, you need this, you need this, and that's you creating awareness onto them. Now you say improve user awareness leads to informed behavior and empowers them to recognize risks. Maybe you have like a newsletter that you're sending out to your users. You can just mention like a security tips like do not reset your password if you are receive an email about resetting it. Like if the user is not intentionally taking action to reset their password, they should not do it because somebody can be phishing them or say, hey, you need to update your password to this. Then they go and input a password and that person has access to the account. So when you're sending those kind of things, those are kind of ways I can educate users. The newsletter or update notes providing guidelines for secure app usage. Now you can tell your users like, okay, maybe if they are copying things to your application or when they're on their profile, they should not do this, they should not do that, depending on the kind of application that you use, right? Like if you are building something like a credit card or banking or whatever thing application, you can tell them they should not share their security pins with other people or those kind of things. Now it's very important that I keep in track of that. And then also like you keep your users up to date with security best practices, just so they don't fall victim, and then they can be a way for an attacker to get into your application. Now on to the 15th, implement data retention and deletion policies. Besides collecting users data, users need a means for their data, like, okay, if I don't want to use this application, how can I get off it alongside my data? I think that's also a requirement for submission for Google Play, that users should be able to, if you've collected information from them, they should be able to request for that information to be deleted or delete it themselves. So that's what we call data deletion policies. Now about data retention is, how do you actually store that data? Like, the data is no longer in transit, it has gone somewhere into your database. How do you manage it behind there? Now define clear policies of data retention. Like, you need to specify like how you actually handle that in your application. Regularly delete unnecessary or expired data. An application that involves users like probably creating drafts, for example, you can set like a policy like, okay, every after 30 days I'm going to be deleting the user's draft, because that's information that is not needed. Or just depending on your own policy, you can decide those kind of things. But that's what we mean by deleting unnecessary or expired data. Ensure comply with GDPR and other regulations. Proper data management practices enhance regulatory compliance. So if you know how to manage user data effectively and you are speaking to your users about how you do it, then you are going to be compliant and your application is going to be much more secure. Now on to the last one. I hope you're enjoying this video so far. Have a means where users can report issues. This is a very underrated point. It's not highly related to security, but you see how security falls into this. And there are going to be like blockers, there are going to be barriers or things trying to hinder them. Now, you need to provide clear channels in which users can report security issues, and not just that, they can complain about something. If you have an application that uses chat, like there's chat functionality, this is also a requirement for Google Play, and I'm just like very, very happy that they have it like that. You need a means for which users can report other users, right? Because someone can be talking inappropriate to another person and the person doesn't like it. If your application doesn't have a means to report that kind of users or to report that kind of action, then you have already lost the person who is being bothered. So you need a means of receiving those feedback, and when you receive those feedback, you need to continually iterate on it. All right, if a user says, okay, this feature is like this or this thing happened like that, then you can iterate, and that is how you give birth to new versions of your application. If user contacts you about something, be sure to respond promptly. If they have to complain about something, be sure to ensure you listen and respond effectively. And I think this just makes it a wrap for us, right? These are very key things that you need to be able to consider when you are trying to build a secure and compliant application of FlutterFlow. I mean, there are other points I can look at. They are just general security best practices, but I think if you can implement this in your application, you are going to leverage your application to a next level, and this is going to play a very huge role in the way you develop in the future. Now, if you think that I left out a point or something very important, or you have just a general opinion to share, please be sure to leave it down in the comment section. And thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found value in it. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, follow me if you need any of these services, like probably to just review your security rules or something to make sure the application is secure or is compliant. You can get to me. I have details in the video description. But yeah, I think that's the end of this video, and thank you very much for watching. Be sure to let me know what you think down in the comment sections. Thank you.